Very happy morning to all of you students. I welcome you all, my students, for this online class. I hope you all are very safe at home. In part 1, we studied about Indian economy during the British period of merchant capital, period of industrial capital, period of finance capital, decline of handicrafts, land tenure system, that is Zamindari, Rayatwari and Mahalwari system, various industrial policies of 1956, 77, 48, then Green Revolution. What is Green Revolution? What are its achievements and what are its weakness? Now let us go to the second part. Large scale industries. The term large scale industries refers to those industries which requires huge infrastructure, manpower and have influx of capital asset. So large scale industry, the name itself says that it means a very large industries which requires huge infrastructure, manpower and a influx of capital, continuous supply of capital, money. The heavy industries of India like iron and steel industry, textile industry, automobile manufacturing industry fall under the large scale industrial arena. In recent years, IT industry can also be included within the jurisdiction of the large scale industrial sector. So usually iron and steel industry, textile industry, automobile industries comes under the large scale area. In recent years, IT industries are also included in the large scale industries. Indian economy is largely dependent on these large industries for its economic growth, generation of foreign currency, and for providing job opportunities to millions of Indians. So Indian economy is completely dependent upon these large scale industries because it is helping for the growth of economy, generation of the foreign currency and also for providing job opportunities. That is, it gives work for millions of people in India. The major large scale industries in India are iron and steel, cotton textile, aircraft industry, jute industry, sugar industry, fertilizer industry, paper industry and so on. Look at the images of all these industries. First large scale industry, iron and steel industry. This is a picture of iron and steel industry. So this first steel industry was started at a place called Kulti near Jharia in West Bengal. The name of the company is Bengal Ironworks Company in 1870. See, this is the first iron and steel company started in Bengal. First large scale steel plant, TISCO, was started at Jamshedpur in 1907, followed by ISCO at Burnpur in 1919. Both belong to the private sector. So these are the TISCO and also ISCO. TISCO, Tata Iron and Steel Company, ISCO, Indian Iron and Steel Company. The first public sector unit was Vishveshwaraya Iron and Steel Works at Bhadravati. All these are managed by SAIL, Steel Authority of India Limited. At present, all important steel plants except the TISCO are under the public sector control. Steel Authority of India Limited, SAIL is Steel Authority of India Limited was established in 1974 and was made responsible for the development of the steel industry. At present, India is the 8th largest steel producing country in the world. So the first steel industry was started at Kulti in the year 1870. TISCO was started at Jamshedpur in 1907 and ISCO was started at Burnpur in 1919. The first public sector unit was Vishveshwaraya Iron and Steel Works. It was started in Bhadravati. All the iron and steel company are under the control of SAIL, that is Steel Authority of India Limited, except only one, that is TISCO. See the various public sector steel plants in India. Rourkela, you have this one in Rourkela, that is in Odisha. It was set up with the assistance of Germany. Next in Billai, you have one with the assistance of Russia. Durgapur, assisted by UK. Bokaro, assisted by Russia. Burnpur, acquired from private sector in 1976. So from 1976, it was taken to the hands of the government. Visakhapatnam, with the assistance of Russia. Salem, Government of India, no external assistance. Vijayanagar, Karnataka, Government of India, no external assistance. Bhadravati, which is in Karnataka, nationalization of Vishveshwaraya Iron and Steel Limited. It was owned by both the center and the state government. These are the various public sector steel plants in India. Next heavy industry is a jute industry. See the image of jute industries. So this jute industry is a very important industry for a country like India because it not only earns very good foreign exchange by exporting our products, but also provides more and more employment opportunities both in agriculture as well as industrial sector. Its first modernized industrial unit was established at a place called at Risra, which is in West Bengal, in the year 1855. See the industry which was started in 1855. The jute industry in the country is traditionally export oriented. Most of our jute products are being exported to other foreign countries. India ranks number 1. India ranks number 1 in the raw jute and jute goods production and number 2 in export of jute goods in the world. So in the production of raw jute, India stands number 1, and in the export of jute goods, India stands number 2 in the world, and it is earning a very good foreign exchange, which is very well useful for the growth of Indian economy. Next industry, cotton and textile industry. It is the image of cotton and textile industry. It is the oldest industry of India and it employs largest number of workers. So this cotton textile industry is a very oldest industry of India and it employs large number of workers. It is the largest organized and broad-based industry. Largest organized and broad-based industry which accounts for nearly 4% of our GDP, 20% of manufacturing value added and 1/3 of total export earnings. So the income from this cotton and textile industry is huge for India. The first Indian modernized cotton cloth mill was established in 1818. See the year 1818 at Fort Gloucester near Calcutta. But this mill was not successful. The second mill, named Mumbai's Spinning and Weaving Company, was established in 1854 at Bombay by KGN Dabar, KGN Khwaja Garib Nawaz. Yes, this is the picture of Mumbai Spinning and Weaving Company. Images of cotton textile industries. Next industry, sugar industry. See the image of sugar industry in India. Sugar industry is the second largest industry among agriculture based industries in India. So first largest is the cotton textile and second largest agro based industry is the sugar industry. India is now the largest producer and consumer of sugar in the world. See the sentence, India is now the largest producer as well as largest consumer of sugar in the world. Maharashtra contributes over 1/3 of the Indian total sugar output, followed closely by Uttar Pradesh. So if you take in India, Maharashtra tops the production of sugar. It produces nearly 1/3 of India's sugar production and next followed by the other state, that is Uttar Pradesh. Next heavy industry is a fertilizer industry. See the image of fertilizer industry. So India is the third largest producer of nitrogenous fertilizers in the world. Next industry, paper industry. This is the image of paper industry. So the first mechanized paper mill was set up in India in 1812 at Serampore in West Bengal. The paper industry in India is ranked among the 15 top global paper industries. So our India's paper industry is ranking position is 15 when you take the world global paper industries. Our first mill was set up in 1812 at a place called Serampore in West Bengal. Next very important industry of India is silk industry. See the image of silk weaving industry. So India is the second largest country in the world producing natural silk. First country is being the China. India is occupying the second position in the production of natural silk. At present, India produces about 16% silk of the world. India enjoys a distinction of being the only country producing all the 5 known commercial varieties of silk. Many countries are producing silk, but India is the only country which produces all the 5 known commercial varieties of silk, namely mulberry, tropical tussar, oak tussar, eri and muga. So these are the 5 commercial varieties of silk produced in India. So India is the second largest country in the world producing natural silk. 16% of the world silk production is coming from India. India produces all the different 5 varieties of silk. Next very important heavy industry is petroleum and natural gas industry. Look at the image of petroleum and natural gas industry in the sea. So India's first successful oil well was dug in India in 1889 at Digboi in Assam. See, this is the first oil well dug in Digboi in Assam. At present, a number of regions with oil reserves have been identified and oil is being extracted in these regions. Now India has many oil reserves areas extracting more amount of oil. For exploration purpose, Oil and Natural Gas Commission ONGC was established in 1956 at Dehradun, that is in Uttarakhand. Yes, ONGC, Oil and Natural Gas Commission. This is in charge for the exploration purpose. It was been set up in 1956 at Dehradun in Uttarakhand. So our first oil mill was successfully dug in 1889 at Digboi. At now we have many other oil reserves producing oil in India, and ONGC is responsible for the exploration purpose of petroleum and natural gas. So far we have seen the large scale industries. Now let us see the small scale industries. So small scale industries plays a very important role for the development of Indian economy in many ways. Many of the big businesses today were all started small and then nurtured into big business, transformed into very big business. First it was started as a small business. So what do you mean by small scale industries? Industry which requires a less infrastructure, producing small number of products is called as a small scale industries. See the images of some of the small scale industries. Next topic, role of small scale industries in economic development. How this small scale industries is bringing the development in the economy. It provides employment. It brings balanced regional development. It helps in mobilization of local resources. It paves way for optimization of capital. It promotes exports. It complements large scale industries. It meets consumer demands. It develops entrepreneurship. Let us see all these roles one by one now. Its first important role is providing employment. So small scale industry use labor intensive techniques. Instead of machine intensive techniques, it includes labor intensive techniques. Hence, it provides more employment opportunities to a large number of people. SSI provides employment to artisans, who is called as artisans, skilled manual worker are called as artisans, technically qualified persons and professionals, people engaged in traditional arts, people in villages and unorganized sectors. So SSS provide employment to all these people, that is to artisans, technically qualified persons and professionals, people engaged in traditional arts, and also people in villages and unorganized sector. The employment capital ratio is high for the small scale industries. Employment capital ratio. It is a ratio that measures how the company can generate profit from its capital employed. That is called as a employment capital ratio. It is high in the case of the SSI. Second important role It brings balanced regional development. Balanced regional development. That is development in all the regions. Balanced regional development. So SSIs promote decentralized development of industries, as most of the SSIs are set up in backward and rural areas. It promotes decentralized. What's the meaning of decentralized? Concentrated at one point, being distributed to the number of points. That's called as a decentralized. And it was set up mostly in the backward area and the rural areas. They remove regional disparities. Regional disparities. Over regions kulla vetrumeya it will be removing by industrializing, by building up industries in rural and backward areas and bring balanced regional development. They help to reduce the problems of congestion, nirkadi, slums, kudisegal, sanitation and pollution in cities. They are mostly found in outside city limits. Usually industries will not be built in the heart of the city or in the middle of the city. All the industries will be constructed very far away from the cities. They help in improving the standard of living of people residing in suburban and rural areas in India. If more factors are set up in village areas, most of the village people will be benefited. They will be provided with a job and naturally their standard of living will be increased. The entrepreneurial talent is tapped in different regions and the income is also distributed instead of being concentrated in the hands of a few individuals or business families. So entrepreneurial talent, the business talent is tapped. Tapped means knocked in different areas so that the income that we are generating, the income that we are getting from these small scale industries will be equally distributed instead of being concentrated only in the hands of a few business families. Okay, so this is the second point, that is it brings balanced regional development. Next role is it helps in mobilization of local resources. Mobilization starting. So SSI help to mobilize, that is to start and utilize the local resources like small savings, entrepreneurial talent, etc. They pave way for promoting traditional family skills and handicrafts. There is a great demand for handicraft goods in developed countries. They help to improve the growth of local entrepreneurs and self-employed professionals in small towns and villages in India. So this exercise help to start and utilize local resources like small saving and also the business talent. It pave way for promoting or starting traditional family skills. Each and every family will have their own traditional skills in any of the things or in handicrafts, so they can be well versed in that and start that small industry. There is a great demand for handicraft goods in developed countries. Indian handicraft goods have got very good demand in the developed countries. So they help to improve the growth of local small businessmen and also self-employed professionals. That is, they themselves, we family members can start a small business in small towns and also in the villages. So this exercise help in mobilization of local resources. Next role, it pave for optimization of capital. Pave way for optimization of capital, that is money. SSIs require less capital. Only to start a large scale industries you need more capital, but to start a small scale industries you require very less capital per unit of output. They provide quick return on investment due to shorter gestation period. If you take large scale industry, to construct the large scale industry itself it will take many years, and the profit, it is not possible for the ordinary layman to construct a large scale industry, but it is possible for the to start a small scale industry. You can invest in that and can get your output in a very short period itself. SSIs function as a stabilizing force. Stabilizing ஒரு நிலையான force by providing high output capital ratio as well as high employment capital ratio. So this SSIs will provide employment opportunities for many persons. At the same time, whatever capital you are investing, you can get back it as in the form of a profit. Output will be there. They encourage the people living in rural areas and small towns to mobilize savings and channelize them into industrial activities. Instead of saving the money and wasting it in some other sources, you can involve yourselves in the business by starting a small scale industry and you can earn the profit. So this is another role played by the small scale industries. Next point is it promote exports. Small scale industry do not require highly sophisticated machinery. Large size machinery is not necessary to start the small scale industry. So import of machines from abroad is not necessary. You need not borrow or buy any machines from the other countries. There is a great demand for goods produced by small scale industry. Thus they reduce the pressure on the country's balance of payment. So whatever we need, the small products can be produced in our own country itself by our own people with the help of this SSI. Recent past, large scale industries are able to borrow large funds with low interest rate and spend large sums on advertisement. If you start a large scale industry, you need more money. If you don't have a money, you have to borrow it from somebody else, from other sources. You have to pay a interest rate for that, and in order to sell the product, you have to spend a large amount of money on advertisement. All these will not take place in the case of a small scale industries and small products. Hence, SSIs are gradually vanishing. SSIs earn valuable foreign exchange through exports from India. Most of our India's small scale Indian products, industry products are being exported and it is earning a very good foreign exchange. There is a very good demand for India's small scale industries products. Next point is complement large scale industries. So to run the small scale industries, we had to open some large scale industries also. For example, you take tailoring. Tailoring is a small scale industry, but to produce the tailoring machine can be done by a large scale industries. So SSIs play a complementary role to large scale sector and support the large scale industries also. To function this small scale industry, some of the large scale industries also should be supported. So SSIs provide parts, components, accessories to large scale industries and meet the requirements of large scale industry through setting up units near the large scale units. So SSIs serve as ancillaries to large scale units. So large scale unit is supporting the small scale units. In the same way, small scale units, by providing all the spare parts, components, accessories, it is also supporting the large scale industries. So large scale industries cannot function without the small scale industry. Some of the small scale industries cannot function without the large scale industries. Next role is meet consumer demands. Small scale industries produce wide range of products, more number of products required by consumers in India. Hence, they serve as an anti-inflationary force by providing goods of daily use. Anti-inflationary force, that is increase in the price level. So these small scale industries produce large number of products required by consumers in India. Our daily use products, starting from a toothpaste, toothbrush, soap, towels, everything, it has been produced by the small scale industry. They serve as an anti-inflationary force by providing goods of daily use. Suppose all these products are not produced in India, once again we have to depend upon the foreign countries for all these products, and once again there will be a rise in the price. So only it is acting as a anti-inflationary force by providing goods of daily use that are needed by the consumers. Next role, develop entrepreneurship. Who is called as an entrepreneurship? The businessman is called as an entrepreneur. So the role played by the SSI is it develop entrepreneurship. SSIs help to develop a class of entrepreneurs, a type of entrepreneurs, a businessman in the society. They help the entrepreneurs, the job seekers, to become job givers. So don't be always seeking for a job. Don't wait until you get a good job for your studies. Whatever job you know, start your own business, become a owner for a business, and you start giving the job for others. Instead, don't go and seek for the job. Next, they promote self-employment and spirit of self-reliance in the society. So SSIs promote self-employment. People will search their own employment, that is own work, instead of waiting for the government to provide them, and a spirit of self-reliance, that is self-dependent in the society. SSIs help to increase the per capita income of India in various ways. If more small-scale industries are started, most of the people will be employed, their income will rise, naturally the per capita income of India also will rise. They facilitate development of backward areas and weaker section of the society. Backward areas, they will be starting the small-scale industries, provide a job for the weaker section, that is poorer section of the society. SSIs are adept in distributing national income in more efficient and equitable manner among the various participants of the society. Small scale industries are well skilled in distributing the national income in more efficient and equitable manner among the various participants of the society. So far we have seen the role of SSIs in economic development, and last one is the developing entrepreneurship. Yes, next topic, MSME, micro, small and medium enterprises. Yes, MSME is, it is divided into two, manufacturing enterprise and service enterprise we can divide. In that it has been segregated as micro, small and medium. Let us see the difference between manufacturing enterprise and service enterprises. See the micro manufacturing enterprise. The investment in plant and machinery does not exceed rupees 25 lakhs. Then that particular industry is called as a micro industry. That is, investment should not cross 25 lakhs. See what's a small manufacturing enterprise. The investment in plant and machinery is more than 25 lakh rupees but does not exceed 5 crores. So if your investment in the industry is between 25 lakhs and 5 crores, that type of industry is called as a small manufacturing enterprises. Next one is the medium manufacturing enterprises. The investment in plant and machinery is more than rupees 5 crores but not exceeding rupees 10 crores. So the investment is between 5 crores and 10 crores. Then that particular type of enterprise is called as a medium manufacturing enterprise. So see the manufacturing, if the investment is between 0 to 25, then it is micro manufacturing enterprise. If it is between 25 lakhs and 5 crores, it is small manufacturing enterprise. If it is between 5 crores and 10 crores, then it is called as a medium manufacturing enterprise. See the service enterprise, if the investment in equipment does not exceed 10 lakhs then it is called micro service enterprise. If the investment in equipment is more than 10 lakhs but does not exceed 2 crores, then it is small service industries. If the investment in equipment is more than 2 crores but does not exceed 5 crores, then it is called medium service enterprise. So, if it is less than 10 lakh, it is micro service enterprise. If it is between 10 lakhs and 2 crores, it is small service enterprise. And if it is between 2 crores and 5 crores, then it is called medium service enterprise. So, we have seen what are the manufacturing enterprises, how it is segregated as micro, small and medium, and what do you mean by service enterprises, and how it is segregated as micro, small and medium. Next, another important topic, public sector and private sector banks. I hope you all know what I mean by a bank, and these banks are divided into two, public sector banks and private sector banks. Let us now see what are they. Public sector banks. So, public sector bank is a bank in which the government holds a major portion of the shares. So, in any bank, if the most of the share is owned by the government, then that particular bank is called as a public sector bank. So, SBI is a public sector bank. The government share in this bank is 58.60%. What is SBI? State Bank of India. PNB, Punjab National Bank, is a public sector bank. The government holds a stake, that is share of 58.87%. Usually in public sector banks, government holdings are more than 50%. So these public sector banks are classified into two categories, nationalized banks and state banks and its associates. In case of nationalized banks, the government controls and regulates the functioning of the banking entity. So this public sector bank itself is divided into two categories. One is nationalized, another one is state bank and its associate. In case of nationalized bank, all the functions are being controlled by the government. Some of the examples are SBI, State Bank of India, PNB, Punjab National Bank, BOB, Bank of Baroda, OBC, Oriental Bank of Commerce, Allahabad Bank, etc. The government keeps reducing the stake, that is share, in public service undertaking banks as and when they sell shares. To that extent, they can also become minority shareholders in these banks. This is in accordance with the privatization policy. So, what do you mean by public sector bank? So, in any bank where the government share is more, then that type of bank is called as a public sector bank. For example, two banks they have given, SBI and PNB. In SBI, the public share is 58.60%. In PNB, the government share is 58.87%. Usually, in all the public sector banks, more than 50% will be held by the government. It is once again divided into two, nationalized and the state bank. In case of nationalized bank, everything will be controlled by the government only. The government keeps reducing the share in PSU banks as and when they sell the shares. To that extent, they can also become minority shareholders in these banks. This is in accordance with the privatization policy. These are some of the examples of public sector bank: IDBI, State Bank of India, Bank of Baroda and Bank of India. Next, let us see what do you mean by private sector banks. In these banks, most of the equity, that is share, is owned by the private bodies, corporations, institutions or individuals rather than the government. So, government share will be very less in these private sector banks. These banks are managed and controlled by the private promoters but not by the government. Of the total banking industry in India, public sector banks constitute 72.9% share, while the rest is covered by the private players. So of the total banks in India, 72% of bank is the public sector bank and remaining is the private sector bank. There are 27 public sector banks and 22 private sector banks. RBI, Reserve Bank of India, the apex banking body, has given license to payment bank and small finance banks also. This is an attempt to boost the government's financial inclusion drive. Why the government is opening many banks? In order to protect the people from the money lenders. As a result, Airtel Payment Bank and Paytm Payments Bank Limited have come up. So we have seen both the public sector bank and the private sector bank also. These are some of the examples of private sector bank: KVB, Karur Vysya Bank, J&K Bank, Axis Bank, Federal Bank, HDFC Bank, Kotak Mahindra Bank, ING Bank, Indus India Bank, Yes Bank, ICICI Bank. These are the top 10 private sector banks in India. Next, nationalization of banks. After independence, the government of India adopted planned economic development. Yes, we all know they have started the 5-year plans in India. 5-year plans came into existence from 1951. The main objective of the economic planning was to attain social welfare. Before independence, commercial banks were in the private sector. So before independence, most of the banks were in the hands of the private sector. These commercial banks failed in helping the government to achieve social objectives of planning. So these commercial banks, they did not help the government to attain their social objective of planning. So the government decided to nationalize 14 major commercial banks on July 19, 1969. Yes, see the image, the news which was published on 1969 in the Times of India paper. See, the news has come: 14 top banks. Ordinance follows unanimous cabinet decision. See, 14 top banks are nationalized. In 1980, again the government took over another 6 commercial banks. Next topic, objectives of nationalization. Why the government have nationalized all these banks? The reason. The government of India nationalized the commercial banks to achieve the following objectives. Let us see what are those objectives. The main objective of nationalization was to attain social welfare. India is a what country? Following mixed economy. Its main aim is to attain the social welfare. Sectors such as agriculture, small and village industries were in need of funds for their expansion and further economic development. So agriculture was in need of fund, village industry, small scale industry were all in need of fund to expand and to increase the economic development. Nationalization of banks helped to curb private monopolies in order to ensure a smooth supply of credit to socially desirable session. If these banks are not being nationalized, then the people have to depend upon the private monopolies in order to get the money, borrow the money for interest, and they would have been suffered a lot. In India, nearly 70% of population lived in rural areas. Therefore, it was needed to encourage the banking habit among the rural population. Most of the people doesn't know what is a bank and what are the functions of a bank, how these banks are helping the people. So in order to educate them, most of the banks have been nationalized. To reduce the regional imbalances where the banking facilities were not available, only in few areas the banks have been opened. Now, after nationalization, many banks have been opened in many of the places. Before independence, the number of banks were certainly inadequate, that is less in number. After nationalization, new bank branches were opened both in rural and also in urban areas. More banks have been opened after this nationalization throughout the country. Banks created credit facilities mainly to the agriculture sector and its allied activities after nationalization. Money has been supplied mostly for the agricultural sector. After new economic policy 1991, the Indian banking industry has been facing the new horizons of competitions, efficiency and productivity. So after 1991, this banking industry was facing many problems like horizons of competition, efficiency and also the productivity. With all these developments, people in villages and slums depend largely on local money lenders for their credit need. Even though even today, in spite of opening number of banks in villages and towns, most of the people in village even today is depending largely on local money lenders for their credit need. So still we have to educate our village people and bring in the knowledge of these banking facilities. Next very important topic, performance of India's 5-year plans. Performance of India's 5-year plans. So economic planning is the process in which the limited natural resources are used skillfully so as to achieve the desired goals. So economic planning is the process in which the limited natural resources are used skillfully. Limited natural resources are used very skillfully. What for? Edhukaga? To achieve the desired goal. The concept of economic planning in India or the 5-year plan is derived from Russia, then USSR, and previously it was called by the name USSR. India has launched so far 12 5-year plans in India. 12th 5-year plan will be the last one. The government of India has decided to stop the launching of 5-year plans and it was replaced by Niti Aayog. So far this economic planning, this 5-year plan is derived from Russia. India launched 12 5-year plans. Our 12th 5-year plan is the last one. The government of India has decided to stop the 5-year plans and they now started a new one, that is Niti Aayog. So let us now see all the 12 5-year plans of India. First 5-year plan, it was during the period of 1951 to 1956. So our first 5-year plan was based on the Herod-Doma model. This is the Herod-Doma model. Increased investment lead to higher capital stock. Higher capital stock leads to higher economic growth. Higher economic growth leads to increased saving. Increased savings leads to increased investment. It is a circle. Its main focus was on the agricultural development of the country. So our first 5-year plan gave utmost importance to the agriculture development of the country. This plan was very successful and India achieved a GDP growth rate of 3.6%, more than its target. Our target is less than 3.6%, but India achieved 3.6%. So first 5-year plan period is 1951 to 56. It was based on Herod-Doma model. Its main focus was on the agriculture development and we achieved the GDP growth rate of 3.6%. Second 5-year plan Second 5-year plan, the period is between 1956 to 1961. So our second 5-year plan was based on a P.C. Mahalanobis model. He is the one father of Indian statistics, Prasanta Chandra Mahalanobis. So our second 5-year plan main focus was on the industrial development of the country. Keep in mind, our first 5-year plan focus was on the agriculture development. Our second 5-year plan focus was fully on the industrial development of the country. So this plan also was very successful and India achieved the growth rate of 4.1%. So our second 5-year plan is between 1956 to 61. It was based on Mahalanobis model. Its main focus was on the industrial development and India achieved the growth rate of 4.1%. Third 5-year plan, the period is from 1961 to 1966. So this third 5-year plan was called as Gadgil Yojana also. So he is Mr. Dr. D.R. Gadgil. So this third 5-year plan was named after him. The main target of this plan was to make the economy independent and to reach self-propelled position or takeoff. Due to Indo-China war, this plan could not achieve its growth target of 5.6%. So our first 5-year plan concentrated on agriculture, second 5-year plan concentrated on industry, third 5-year plan main target was to make the economy independent and to reach self-propelled position or takeoff, that is self-sufficient, should not depend upon the other country. But what happened during this period, Indo-China war took place, so our India was not in a position to attain our required target, that is growth target of 5.6%. So plan holiday, the period from 1966 to 69 is called as a plan holiday, that is India did not create any new planning terms. The main reason behind the plan holiday was the Indo-Pakistan war and the failure of third 5-year plan. See the image of Indo-Pakistan war in 1965. So because of this war, India was not in a position to organize a new plan, and also our third plan was a failure. So during this plan holidays, annual plans were made, that is every year plans were made, and equal importance was given to all the sector, that is agriculture and its allied sectors, and also to the industrial sector. So far we have seen 3 plans. First plan is a great success, second plan is a great success, third plan is not a success because of the Indo-China war, and so India has given a plan holiday between 1966 to 1969. Fourth 5-year plan, 1969 to 1974. There are 2 main objectives of this plan, that is growth with stability and progressive achievement of self-reliance. Growth with stability and progressive achievement of self-reliance. We have to grow with stability. Second one, achievement of self-reliance, self-dependent. This plan failed and could achieve growth rate of 3.3% only against the target of 5.7%. So our fourth 5-year plan was also a failure. India was able to achieve a growth rate of only 3.3%, but our targeted growth rate is 5.7%. Fifth 5-year plan, the period is from 1974 to 1979. So what happened in this plan? In this plan, Top priority was given to agriculture, next came industry, and next came mines. So they have fixed the priority as give most priority for agriculture, then give for industry, then for mining. Overall, this plan was successful, which achieved the growth rate of 4.8% against the target of 4.4%. So our fifth 5-year plan was a great success. Our achievement was 4.8%, but our target was only 4.4. It was a great success. The draft of this plan was prepared and launched by D.P. Dar. So this plan was terminated in 1978. So the plan duration is till 1979, but it was terminated in 1978. It was launched by a person named D.P. Dar. He is the one, the economist D.P. Dar. Next is the rolling plan. So this plan was started with an annual plan for 1978 to 79, and it's a continuation of the terminated fifth 5-year plan. So the fifth 5-year plan period is from 1974 to 1979, but it was terminated in 1978. So the plan that was formed, that annual plan that was formed in 1978 to 79 is called as a rolling plan. Sixth 5-year plan, the period is from 1980 to 1985. The main objective of this plan was poverty eradication and technological self-reliance. That is, we have to eradicate poverty in India and technology self-reliance. We need not depend upon other country for any of the technology. We have to be self-dependent in technology. This was the main objective of sixth 5-year plan. The motto was Garibi Hato. See, Garibi Hato, the biggest Jumla in Indian history. It was based on Investment Yojana. Its growth target was 5.2%, but it achieved 5.7%. So our sixth 5-year plan also was a great success. Our achievement is 5.7, but our target is 5.2%. Seventh 5-year plan, period from 1985 to 1990. The main objectives of this plan included the establishment of self-sufficient economy and opportunities for productive employment. So two objectives of this plan is self-sufficient economy. Do not borrow anything from other countries. That is, do not import anything from other countries. And next one, to provide employment opportunities. For the first time, due to the pressure from private sector, the private sector got the priority over the public sector. Its growth target was 5.0%, but it achieved 6.0%. Next important one is that they have given importance for private sector, and this plan also was a great success. We have achieved the growth rate of 6.0%, but our target was only 5.0%. So this plan also was a great success. Next is annual plan. Eighth 5-year plan could not take place due to volatile political situation at the center. So two annual programs are formed in 1990 to 91 and 91 to 92. So we could not frame a 8th 5-year plan due to some political situation which arose in the center. So we are able to make only two annual programs, that is from 1990 to 91 one and 1991 to 92 another. Yes, Government of India framed the 8th 5-year plan in the year 1992 to 1997. In this plan, the top priority was given to development of the human resource, that is employment, education and public health. So in the 8th 5-year plan, the importance was given for the development of the human resource, that is to take care of employment, education and the health. During this plan, new economic policy of India was introduced. This plan was successful and got annual growth rate of 6.8% against a target of 5.6%. So this plan was a high great success where India achieved 6.8%, but the target was only 5.6%. So this plan importance was given for the development of the human resources. 9th 5-year plan 1997 to 2002. So the main focus of this plan was growth with justice and equity. Growth with justice and equity. This plan failed to achieve the growth target of 7%, and Indian economy grew only at the rate of 5.6%. In this plan, our target was 7%, but India was able to achieve only 5.6%. So, this 9th 5-year plan was a failure. 10th 5-year plan 2002 to 2007. So this plan aimed to double the per capita income of India in the next 10 years. It aimed to reduce the poverty ratio to 15% by 2012. So the two main aim is to double the per capita income of Indian people within the next 10 years. To double the per capita income of the Indian people in the next 10 years. Next point is to reduce the poverty ratio to only 15% by the year 2012. Its growth target was 8.0%, but it achieved only 7.2%. So 10th 5-year plan was also a failure plan. India was not able to achieve the growth target of 8.0%. 11th 5-year plan, the period is between 2007 to 2012. So its main theme was faster and more inclusive growth. The main aim is what? Faster and more inclusive growth. Its growth rate target was 8.1%, but it achieved only 7.9%. So this plan also was a failure. We are not able to achieve the growth rate of 8.1%, and the main theme was towards faster and more inclusive growth. 12th 5-year plan 2012 to 2017. Its main theme is faster, more inclusive and sustainable growth. Faster, more inclusive and sustainable growth. Its growth rate target is 8%. These plans had guided the government as to how it should utilize scarce resource so that maximum benefits can be gained. It is worthy to mention here that Indian government adopted the concept of 5-year plans from Russia. So our 12th 5-year plan is from 2012 to 2017. Its main theme is faster, more inclusive and sustainable growth. Its growth rate target is 8%. So all these 12 5-year plans guided the government as how it should utilize scarce resource, that is limited resource, so that maximum more benefit can be gained. It is worthy to mention here that Indian government adopted the concept of 5-year plan from Russia. Next topic, Niti Aayog, National Institution for Transforming India. So after the 12th 5-year plan, no more plans have been introduced in India. The 5-year plan was replaced by Niti Aayog. The Planning Commission has been replaced by the Niti Aayog on 1st January 2015. Niti Aayog will monitor, coordinate and ensure implementation of the accepted sustainable development goals. So to achieve all the goals of India and to monitor and coordinate and to implement, this Niti Aayog will play the vital role. Niti Aayog serves as a knowledge hub, that's a meeting point, it's called as a hub, and monitors progress in the implementation of policies and programs of the Government of India. So all the government policies and programs will be implemented by Niti Aayog. It includes the matters of national and international importance on the economic front, dissemination of best practices, that is various principles, from within the country and from other nations, the inclusion of new policy ideas and specific issue-based support. So everything related to national and international policies will be framed and implemented by the Niti Aayog. In order to understand the achievements of the Niti Aayog, researches need to be done then and there. Next topic, development indicators. How we have to measure the development of any country. So two indicators are given here, HDI, Human Development Index, and PQLI, Physical Quality of Life Index. Human Development Index, HDI. So HDI was developed by the Pakistani economist Mehboob Ullah and the Indian economist Amartya Kumar Sen in 1990 and was published by the United Nations Development Programme. It is constructed based on Life Expectancy Index, Education Index and GDP per capita. Human Development Index, see the various indices, dimensions, long and healthy life, knowledge, decent standard of living, indicator, life expectancy at birth, adult literacy rate, cross enrollment ratio, GDP per capita, dimensions index, life expectancy index, education index, GDP index. HDI is based on the following three indicators: longevity, education and standard of living. Longevity is measured by life expectancy at birth, that is how long you will be living in this earth. Educational attainment. Next, standard of living measured by real GDP per capita. So the top three countries of HDI is Norway, Australia and Switzerland. Before calculating HDI, the fixed minimum and maximum values of each indicator are chosen. The performance in each dimension is expressed as a value between 0 and 1 by applying the following formula. So dimension index, that formula is dimension index is equal to actual value minus minimum value divided by maximum value minus minimum value. So according to Planning Commission's National Human Development Report 2011, HDI has improved significantly between 1980 and 2011. So between 1980 to 2011, the HDI in India has been significantly improved. As per latest Human Development Report, which was published in 2016 by the United Nations Development Programme, India has been ranked 131st out of 188 countries. So our rank in world is 131 out of 188. We are far behind only, but yet we have improved. Out of 188 countries, India lies in medium human development bracket. So our HDI is not improved very well. We are in the medium level. The other nations such as Bangladesh, Bhutan, Pakistan, Kenya, Myanmar and Nepal attained the medium human development. Same as India, these nations are also in the medium human development. The HDR 2016 stated that regional disparities in education, health and living standards within India has caused India's downfall to 27% on HDI score. So our 2016 status is telling that why India's share has come to 27% low means due to the regional disparities in education, health and living standards among the people. So we have to improve our education, we have to improve our health and also we have to improve our living standard of the people. Automatically HDI of India also will improve. Biswajit Guha has stated that the calculation of HDI neglected many important aspects of human development. He has created 4 indices of HDI as HDI 1, HDI 2, HDI 3 and HDI 4. HDI 1 is based on UNDP methodology as given in the Human Development Report. So this Biswajit Guha is stating that 4 more indices have to be included in order to measure the HDI. That is nothing but HDI 1, HDI 2, HDI 3 and HDI 4, and HDI 1 is full and full based on UNDP methodology. Various countries including India are continuously making effort to improve and enlarge the scope of available statistical information. So all the countries are trying to improve and marching towards growth and development, same like India also. Next, Physical Quality of Life Index, that is PQLI. Maurice D. Morris developed the Physical Quality of Life Index. The PQLI is a measure to calculate the quality of life. So it is a measure to calculate the quality of life. He included 3 indicators to measure this quality of life, that is life expectancy, infant mortality rate and literacy rate. So these are the concept of Maurice D. Morris. He said that PQLI can be measured by using 3 important indicators. One is life expectancy, infant mortality and the literacy rate of any particular country. A scale of each indicator ranges from the number 1 to 100. Number 1 represents the worst performance by any country, 100 is the best performance. So he has started to allocate range from 1 to 100. If any country is scoring 1, that is the worst performance. Any country is scoring 100, it is the best performance. Countries scoring between 1 to 100 will be the minimum performance. For example, in case of life expectancy, the upper limit of 100, this was assigned to 77 years, which was achieved by Sweden in 1973. So in 1973 in Sweden, the life expectancy of the people was 77 years. That is, people living in Sweden can live or lived till the age of 77. It was a statistical report calculated in the year 1973. The lower limit of 1 was assigned to 28 years, which was achieved by Guinea-Bissau in 1960. See the country Guinea-Bissau. The people living in the country can live only for 28 years. So if they cannot cross 28 years, they will be dying at the age of 28. So here the marks awarded for them or the lower limit was them was only 1. Now let us see the difference between HDI and PQLI. See the main difference between HDI and PQLI. HDI, Human Development Index. PQLI, Physical Quality of Life Index. It is a composite statistic of life expectancy. It is a measure to calculate the quality of life, that is well-being of a country. HDI includes the income. PQLI excludes the income. Income will not be taken into consideration for the measure of PQLI, whereas income will be taken into consideration for the measurement of HDI. It represents, that is HDI represents both physical and financial attributes of development, whereas PQLI represents only the physical aspects of life. These are the main difference between HDI and PQLI. Yes students, we have now come to the conclusion. Let us recap everything. The British were more focused on the money from Indians than good governance. British came to India to take away the Indians' money, not the good government. Some positive thing happens during the British rule. Yes, we cannot deny that. They eradicated systems like Sati, introduced railway services, English language and education, infrastructure, and basic principle of capitalist economy. All these are still existing in India because of this British people. After independence, the government of India formulated many policies with the help of 5-year plans to achieve the growth target. Among the other things, the major challenges that still continue are, even though many 5-year plans have been launched, many steps have been taken by the government, still our India is facing certain problems. What are they? Poor health standard, female foeticide, that is killing the female child, declining child sex ratio, open defecation, social and economic inequalities, increasing slumming, urban congestion, and declining qualities of basic environmental resources, namely air, land and water. So some more serious steps should be taken by the government of India to eradicate all this problem, and India should march towards development and enter into the name of developed economy very soon. Yes students, the lesson is completed. I hope you understood all the concepts very clearly. I will meet you in the next chapter very soon. Thank you.